lot of comments from Christian's presentation, but I pick on one. It was in Spanish, but I think it reflects very well on human risk. And it said, I would start smoking only for voting for Messi. Right? That's great. So let me introduce you to Maria. Maria is Maria Alejandra Díaz. Maria is the Regional Compliance Officer of working at Boehringer Ingelheim. That's the way I should pronounce it, Matthias.
It's not easy to pronounce in German. Yes, for me it's impossible.
So, Maria is responsible for the Hispanic South American countries, covering farm and healthcare compliance, anti-corruption, data protection, all very serious stuff. So I have the pleasure to coordinate this panel. I do have a number of questions, but I will start raising the point that the awareness of how people make decisions is important to improve the compliance program. The idea that perfect rationality, which forms the basis of many economic theories, is actually not an accurate description of how people make decisions. So I would like to ask how behavioral ethics is relevant and how irrationality, perhaps plain stupidity, affects compliance.
Okay. Christian, do you want to add something, or?
I'll let you go first. I've spoken far too much. You can go first.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about my experience, and let me go first to the stupidity or irrationality. That for me, it's something that maybe could start with irrationality, but then could become rational and on purpose violation or uncompliant situation. And I learned a concept that is slippery slope. There is used in behavioral compliance, right, Christian? There is, in Spanish, is la pendiente resbaladiza, where people start by doing little mistakes or maybe deviations. Nobody knows that. And then numerous quantities of unbehaved turns into a big problem for the company, because in that pathway, nobody controlled, nobody makes something like nudging, for example. That is a very important concept between within behavioral compliance. So there would be some measures like nudging, like control, or other measures to avoid that misbehaviors, let's say, or irrational, that is not so irrational mistakes.
Chris?
Yeah, so what I think is really interesting about the sort of topic of human behavior and decision making is that when we look at why people do things, it's very tempting to sort of have a simple answer. And that simple answer is, if somebody's done something bad, they're a bad person. And we get taught this from a very young age about goodies and baddies. Watch any movie, and you very often have these very stereotypical characters. And that's how often we think about compliance programs. So when we focus on how we're going to do compliance, we often start from, we've got to stop those bad people. And actually, the really, really bad people will just do what they want to do anyway, because they're bad and they don't care. So the bit that we need to look at is precisely Maria's point, is the people in the middle. And that's a lot of people. You know, there's some people that will always be good, no matter what, the Mother Teresa end of the spectrum. And then there's the people who will always be bad. Pick your example there, at the other end. That's very small percentage of people. What we have in the middle is people that could be good or could be bad and are influenced by things. And that's why I think when you look at the behavioral challenge, we mustn't sit there and assume that everybody who does something wrong is evil. We all make mistakes. We can all persuade ourselves to do things that we probably shouldn't do. And if you change the circumstance or the environment, we might behave differently. So I think this is a really interesting point. The slippery slope part that you talked about is really a good illustration of how good people, or generally good people, can turn themselves into bad people because the environment has supported that. And so what we need to do is to stop that from happening. And if we think about the human risk problem, not as being we've got to reprogram bad people, but how do we stop the average person who is generally trying to do the right thing from being in a position where they might make an error, where they might do something they might regret?
It seems like people are likely to put aside their personal moral standards when they are at work, if they think that this is what is expected from the role. And roles came with expectations, and these expectations can translate into pressure to compromise our own ethical standards. And that leads me to the next question, which is how ethics become part of the reward, of the recognition and promotion system. Maria.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear all your question because my internet connection is not good.
No worries.
But
I was asking how ethics become part of the reward and the recognition system within the organization.
Yeah, from my point of view, it's directly linked with the stage of the maturity of the compliance program within a company. And Christian showed an excellent slide where people is starting from the very beginning, learning from compliance, and then being like an adult, and then being more mature as an organization in terms of compliance. So I think that you have to think what is the best situation or roles where you could use motivations, rewards to those employees that have excellent performance in terms of ethics, not only comply with their obligations, but do things in a very excellent approach from an ethic and compliance point of view. One thing that is, I think it's very useful is to have, as part of the objectives of the company and in the objectives of each employee, to have compliance as a condition on how to do things in the right way. So if you don't have, or the employees don't have the objective to do things, to reach the numbers, reach the commercial objectives, but if you reached that objective in a wrong way, unethical, against the law, that would be something that it should be included in the objective and the evaluation of that person and how was his performance. And the bonus should be tied some way to the how they achieved their objectives, business objectives. Okay, right. So this is something that for me it's important, but at the same time you need to also have disciplinary actions in the same at the same way, and I think it's important always a balance, not only motivation or rewards, but also disciplinary actions, control. I think everything is important.
So could it be ethical to pay a bonus, let's say with money, for complying with a program, such as you know, making a denounce with a whistleblower channel, rewarding with money? Would it be ethical?
So, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to, so look, what I think is really interesting about this question is that we logically focus on financial reward, and we say we need to pay people because then they'll do. Now, financial reward is a really powerful motivator. It's not, by the way, the most powerful motivator. There are other things that are much more effective, but we all lean on that particular one. So should we be bribing people to behave properly? No, and I'll give you a real world example why that's a bad idea. And anybody that's in a relationship will recognize this thing. If you buy your partner flowers or a present every time you do something wrong, right, they become conditioned to that being a piece, and they will conclude that every time you're paying them, every time you buy flowers, for example, you must have done something wrong, right? We read into patterns, and so we start to attribute the idea that I only get, you know, I'm only, if I do good behavior, I get paid for it. If I don't do good behavior, then I don't get paid for it, right? So after a while, the effect of the extra cash starts to get reduced, and actually just normal. So what that then happens is, well, if I'm not behaving well, I'm not being paid, so it doesn't matter. So it creates these very perverse incentives. Now, why would you pay whistleblowers? Not because you want to reward their whistleblowing, but because they are taking a massive personal risk that will see them potentially never working either in that industry or anywhere else again. So the reason you would give a reward to whistleblowers is to say to them, okay, you're putting your career on the line here, and I'm going to give you enough money so that you don't have to worry. Because if you're weighing up feeding your family versus whistleblowing, feeding your family is going to come first every single time. So you have to make it easy for people to do. So the reward for whistleblowing isn't a bribe. It is actually to unencumber them and allow them to do the thing they need to do, because everybody accepts the risks of being a whistleblower are massive for your personal career perspective. So I think those two things are fundamentally different. So I'm massively in favor of rewards for whistleblowing for that reason. There are some unintended consequences we need to think about. But if you're paying your employees to do the right thing, then you are normalizing a whole set of things that are going to lead to all sorts of predictable consequences that you don't want. So I don't see the two things as analogous, and I think there's very distinct reasons for those two distinctions.
Could you give us examples of incentives other than money? Yeah.
Look, we all want to have a sense of purpose and a sense that we're achieving something. And so, you know, ultimately giving employees something may cost you money. But if you actually gave people more vacation, better work-life balance, a sense that they were doing something that was worthwhile, that was pro-social, maybe expand your community programs, you allow them to work with underprivileged people, find something that's relevant to what you're doing, and really live a purpose where they can get up in the morning and not have to be embarrassed about who they're working for. And honestly, if you look at a lot of jobs that are very highly paid, are highly paid, and because actually you're compensating for something. I'm buying your time. I'm buying your silence on a particular moral issue. So it's not a straightforward particular trade that sort of says every single thing has to be remunerated at the highest levels. There are lots of levers you can pull. You know, we've all worked for horrible bosses that we never want to work for again. And actually, that's not worth it. So treating people like they're human, giving them opportunities, allowing them time to, maybe, you know, you just let them go and spend an afternoon watching their kids play sport. That's worth stuff money can't buy. And so finding the, you know, what, and the answer to the question isn't a one size fits all. This is the clever thing here. Money is a pretty primitive measure. If you can start to say to your employees, we value who you are for who you are. And that, after all, is why you hire people. You go through an interview process, you ask them all about who they are to try and find, if you genuinely value them, then find ways, you know, have a framework that allows you to deploy those things, not in an unfair manner where you give somebody something that's very high value and someone else can have, you know, 5-minute coffee break, but find things that are equitable. And if you can give employees options that make them feel good, that's worth so much more than, you know, once we've got over the basic, I need money to live, you can make them feel so much better. So it's small, subtle things that can have a massive difference.
Well, that's absolutely agree with that. So an approach that focuses on ethics, that being communicating the ethical values, explaining how and why an organization does business, encouraging individuals based on ethical values. So it appears to be at least as important as having clear rules, and that the employees must follow, and also the related consequences, the related sanctions. So do you agree that in some circumstances, nudging compliance, nudging ethics can be more effective than actually enforcing compliance?
Okay, I'll go first then, Maria. Look, I think it comes back to working out what the consequences are of them not doing the thing you need them to do. So if we're in a situation, let's take the airline industry, where an accident can have severe consequences, I need to put controls in place to make sure those really bad things can't happen. And therefore, I don't want people doing, you know, silly things. And that's it. So I have to build an environment where I make sure those things don't happen. And that's a combination of physical controls. It's a combination of processes, training, having the right sort of culture. So you build things around that are there. If you have something that is more recoverable, and the best company that I've seen talk about this is Netflix. And Netflix distinguishes between recoverable issues, things you never, ever, ever want to have happen, credit card details being exposed publicly, bullying, harassment, those sorts of things. Those things you build very tight controls around because you say that's unacceptable. There are other things where you say it's recoverable, so it's undesirable, so we build a slightly different form of control around it, recognizing that we can recover from it. And therefore, what that recognizes is that people will make mistakes. And what we want them to do is make mistakes in a safe space. Now, ideally, they don't make any, but that's unrealistic. So let's have them make mistakes it's okay to make. And let's not forget that if we want innovation, people are going to screw up because innovation is trial and error. We need those errors to discover things. So if you build a culture where everything is tightly controlled, then you will not get the right form of innovation because people will be too scared to do that because they won't want to make the mistakes that go with it. So what we need to do is balance those things out. So to answer your question, nudging has its place. It's one of a multitude of different tools. And again, it's about looking and saying, what are you trying to solve here? And very often I come back to that slide I presented. We don't think about which tool we're using. We just kind of go, oh, let's try a little bit of nudging here. Nudging might be the worst possible thing to do if the thing you're nudging is massively safety critical. On the other hand, it might be absolutely fabulous if there's a qualitative element and we know that the nudge works. So it's a case of looking at it as a toolkit, not as a sort of primitive one size fits all, you know, here's what I do in this situation. It's organization and context dependent.
Absolutely. And I want to move on I think a field that you Maria would like to hear, and I think you agree with, is that the idea that is key for a compliance officer to get to know the people you work with. at all levels of the organization. And as you always say, it is done by walking, by being really available for the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's the idea, the communicator's skills for a compliance officer. So bringing the spirit of compliance to every corner of the organization.
Yeah.
So how behavioral compliance can help in bringing some fun to compliance training, so they're not perceived as boring or uninteresting.
Yeah. I would like to start with an experience I had when I started in compliance, because I was working in a pharmaceutical company, and that is very boring. But in the new position as compliance officer, I started in the business that is consumer, Johnson & Johnson consumer products. That the group of people was completely different, very young, very active, and I realized that I needed to be or to apply a new approach in the way that they feel compliance near to them. So I find fun approach, maybe some humor in the presentations, and demonstrate them that compliance is not boring, is something that is in a day-to-day life and activities, and they help them to more suitable or adequate approach or decisions. So for me, fun and sense of humor during training, during conversations is very key to demonstrate that compliance is not locked in an office with a boring compliance officer. So for me, the perfect approach is being in close in touch with the people, with the teams. What are the concerns? How we can help them, and at the same time, you can also learn from them and maybe identify those people who may be more dangerous, or we could make some more controls because they are eager to be closer to the risks. So it's something that is intuitive, right? You need to know people, know what their concerns, what their objectives, and see how they work. And then by knowing people, you can tailor your approach with them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, for me, fun is a must, because if not, I'm boring from myself.
Yeah, using a risk-based approach to get very close to people, and that's that skill, people skill for a compliance officer is absolutely key. And I guess that this COVID situation, it's posing some complications to that, to this, and also that I guess that perhaps the compliance officer should also be trained in this the use of these new technologies for delivering trainings and so on. I think that that's something you Chris have been working a lot, right, recently?
Yeah, so I take a very simple approach, which is if compliance is the business of influencing people, then we need to know how to engage with people. And actually, this has always been true. but it's particularly true now in the digital world. Compliance is about communication, persuasion, and audience engagement. Now, nobody thinks to train compliance people in how you do digital presentations, in the technologies that they can use, but that's really important. If you think about it, it's almost like advertising. And if the message that you're sending is that you're a boring function that doesn't know how to engage people, then you're going to lose your audience and they're not going to pay attention to you. So you need to be thinking about that. And one of the things I think is really interesting about the current environment, everybody or most people working from home, so you can see other companies that are really good at engaging. There are social media companies, there are companies like Peloton, lots of examples where there are companies that are really good at engaging with people in this environment. What we should be doing in the compliance discipline is looking at those and not thinking, oh, compliance is really serious, so I need to be really serious, but actually saying, how do those work? What techniques are they using to grab my attention, to get me to focus, to get me to spend money maybe, and how can we use those in compliance? And you're right, that's not in the compliance skill set, but I think it needs to be. So one of the areas I've been looking at is what I call compliance communications toolkit, which is really about saying compliance is the business of communication and persuasion. So people need to understand the technology. You need to understand the software. You need to understand the techniques, because presenting in this environment is not the same as presenting in the real world. And there's some great stuff. And if you can stand out as a compliance person and you look like you're really engaged, people will pay attention even if your branding is terrible. And so because compliance often comes with a bad reputation, even a small amount of effort that people don't expect can be really, really powerful. So for me, this is not just something that's nice for compliance people to understand. It's absolute, this is the job. And if you get that wrong, doesn't matter how good your program is, you will lose people. And we need to start shifting that up. And that requires a lot of people to learn some new skills. And if you do that, you can be really successful.
Yeah. Okay.
So talking about technology, and this is the last question I have, and then we can move to see if we've got some question from the audience. So now that we got all this brand new technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, and so on, so it is possible for a company to estimate who's most likely to misbehave, and even when?
From my point of view, and again, is based on my experience, I think that people that is moved by results, like, for example, marketing and sales, and because their objective is to reach that number, and maybe the how could be in a gray zone. I think this is people that could be making some mistakes or irrationalities. And for example, other areas like, I don't know, quality, for example, in my company, my pharmaceutical company, or clinical operations that are more ruled, more stick to procedures, are less risky people. So you wouldn't expect to have misbehaviors there. So this is something that I personally take into account. So maybe when I want to supervise or control or monitor, start, for example, in marketing and sales, and not in quality, for example, or regulatory affairs, because it's something that I take into account, how they're near to risks, to take risks.
So I'm going to split your sentence into two parts, and I'm going to say I liked half of it and I didn't like half of it. The half that I liked was when you said the situations that people might have problems in, or where they might do something, because that for me is the key piece here. if you are a genuine criminal who is trying to do bad things, right, the first thing you're going to do is make sure that you do all of the obvious things, right? You're going to be very well behaved. You're going to check in on time. You're going to do all your mandatory training because you don't want to come up on a register. So the real criminal people, the people you really want to worry about, are going to look super compliant. That's the trick number one. So what you're going to find is that the people who aren't compliant are probably, less challenged, less. And I think it's really dangerous to assume that you can naturally infer from people's behaviors how they're going to behave in the future. And if people feel like you're doing that, you will end up with that Tom Cruise movie called Minority Report, where they went out and arrested people before they'd committed crimes. Always, when you think about technology, always think about the movies and literature because it gives you some clues about the worst case scenario. Now, what I loved about the bit you talked about situations is if you start to look at compliance and conduct within organizations from the perspective of organizational situations. When is these things happening? We never analyze that. We always look at which people have done things. Start looking at which programs, which situations, which times of the week, which environmental factors contribute, and you'll start to identify trends. So I've seen lots of examples where companies have said, we've got lots of breaches of this policy, we're going to fire all these people. I'm exaggerating slightly. Right. Yeah. And actually what it turned out was that these weren't people it was a terrible system that made it really difficult to comply. And for very good reasons, they were giving up. Now, if you changed the system, you would have got the compliant behavior you wanted. So every time something goes wrong in an organization, the first question always gets asked is, whose fault is this? I say to people, ask that question, but not straight away. Start by saying, what in the environment could have caused this problem? And look at environmental factors, because we respond to the environment that we're in. And if you have an environment that causes lots of people to behave in a particular way, you have a problem with the environment. May not be the whole story, but you have a problem with the environment. And we fixate, because we love this, on these are bad people, they're individual. It's easier for us to understand a story that is bad people rather than we had an environment that helped cause that. So organizations need to stop and say what in the environment is potentially contributing. Now, of course, if it turns out it's an individual doing crazy stuff, then go after that individual. But if you start with the idea that every time it's automatically their fault, you're going to miss opportunities to stop other people falling into the same trap. So if you have breaches of a policy and lots of people are doing it, there is something wrong with the policy, either the way it's communicated, the way it's trained, what it's doing. You've got to look at those environmental factors. And we don't. We focus on people. And that is a big mistake because people know that you're doing that and they will react accordingly. So it's a really dangerous path to see this as a human problem. Think about the organizational piece first, and the human bit can come after that.
So that connects with the concept of root cause analysis that is now part of the recommendations that the Department of Justice make to their prosecutors when analyzing the effectiveness of a compliance program. So when doing an internal investigation, you should go further than just finding the bad apple, right? And go into the root cause of the wrongdoing.
So I work with a number. I work with a number of companies that are going through those sorts of investigations, and the very tempting thing to do is to solve the things that are easy. So we'll change the systems, we'll send people on a training course, we'll write a new policy, and that looks really good on paper. It's kind of an audit-based solution, if you like. But what you need to do is, when you look at the root cause, is to dig a little bit deeper. And not to endow people who have caused the problem automatically with a criminal mindset. Because actually, you might have caused them they might have thought the bit of fraud they were committing or the thing that they did was actually something you wanted. And to, a little bit, I wanted to pick up one of your earlier questions, Raúl, which is about, you sort of said, what can we do with ethical behavior? Find me a company in the world that says we are evil and we set out to do bad things. There isn't a single one. It's a credible company that's going to say it. Every single company says the right thing. So what that tells you is ethics is not a case of it's not a case of what you say, it's what a case you do on the ground. And the biggest bit we have to remove is this differentiator between what companies claim to be and what they are in reality. And a lot of companies think they solve the problem by, we build an ethical construct, we've got loads of processes that look really good that show how ethical we are. But if the actual lived behaviors on the ground are different, Doesn't matter what you're saying.
Yeah, I completely agree. Mm-hmm.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience. One related to the process of taking new joiners to the company, the onboarding system, if that it may help doing some background check analysis on the people in order to anticipate any potential wrongdoer or people that could be outside of the compliance system beforehand, so you can prevent those conducts. That's something you would recommend doing, or there is the behavioral science could help in the onboarding process?
For me, I think it would be useful, especially in the middle and top management, to see how ethical they could be, but it's not easy. For example, in countries that is kind of forbidden to make that kind of backgrounds. So it's not easy to do. But I think that if ethic is an important aspect in the company, it should be included in that key roles. I mean, senior management, middle management. I think it should be definitely included in the background check, or maybe during the interview, make some questions regarding ethic dilemmas or something. It's for me, it's important, and it's not easy to convince the HR, for example, department to do it, because sometimes they consider that we could be so invasive when we are asking that question to the persons that are applying to a position in our company, for example. But for me, I would definitely include that kind of questions or backgrounds in the key roles, for example.
So I come back to the answer I gave you before around what would really bad people do, right? Really bad people are going to look like really good people, right? They are going to prepare, they are going to do the right, they're going to behave in the way you want. So any process that relies on kind of sussing out whether they're likely to be bad people is potentially flawed for that reason. Now, I'm not saying don't do background checks, all really important, right? You probably don't want to be taking someone on with a criminal record in a role that requires them to be handling money or something of risk, right? There are certain things where you would say that's not so of course do background checks, and of course eliminate people where there are obvious red flags. I'm a big fan of rehabilitation of people, so I don't think we should automatically say that they're automatic, but I think there's some warning signs you can look out for. But what's really interesting there is, I think, what happens if you imagine you've hired the wrong kind of person. Let's assume that there is this wrong. Then if they're in an environment where that sort of behavior is generally unacceptable, they notice from the way other people are behaving that that's not what you do, then that is a much stronger piece of risk management than actually trying to screen them out in the first place, because people will mold their behavior to the organization that they see. And so I think what you can find in many organizations is actually the pre-hire screening wouldn't have caught people who have found themselves in situations where they've actually done something because in the moment they felt it was okay. Something in the environment has driven them to that behavior. So if you put all your reliance on screening these people out in the first place and nothing on the cultural piece and the way people behave in the office, then you're missing a huge opportunity. And actually you can turn good people into bad people. And there's plenty of there's high profile historic examples that we can pick where we can say, here's good people doing bad things and people who don't speak up. So you can't fix that by screening them out, because actually, if you wanted to screen out the potential people that might do the wrong thing in your organization, don't hire anyone. Because, and this is the controversial point, pretty much every single person has the capability in the right circumstances of doing things you don't want. So what we have to focus on is those circumstances. So screen out the extremities, right? Don't, there's certain people, you do not want to employ certain types of people, no question. But it's that cultural piece that's really important. And I think the problem that is in the solution that sort of says it's all in the hiring is missing the point that actually what you've got there is a flawed process that actually can be undermined by what they see on the ground. You will modify your behaviors according to the environment that you're in. If the environment that you're in says to you that it's okay to do certain things, you'll do it regardless of the questions you are asked to interview or what you were told in your induction training. And so that's the key piece here, is don't think about that as a foolproof mechanism. And a lot of people like it because you go, we'll screen them out and then we'll never have that problem. That is not how it works.
So for the sake of the time, I wanna ask the last one, and it's it's I think connected to the previous one, and it's about cultural differences. If this is something we should take into account for all this purpose, and people behaves differently in different cultures or not.
Yes. Hugely important, really, really important. And global organizations, particularly ones that have a very strong dominant home market, you can find a situation where you end up projecting things internationally that just don't work. And so, I have worked for a large Swiss organization. What works in Switzerland doesn't necessarily play well in the UK, doesn't necessarily play well in the US, doesn't necessarily play well in Argentina. And so geographic challenge is one thing. The second bit is even within the same geography, you can have different forms of culture. And then let me throw a third thing into the mix, which is diversity. Companies now are moving down the path of getting more diverse workforces. That's good because you get fresh ideas into the room. The challenge with that is that people come with different backgrounds and different forms of behavior and different reference points. So one of the things that you're going to see as we get more diverse populations in companies is that the norms that you think people are bringing into the workplace will be different. People's views will change on what's acceptable, what's not. You can see it generationally as well as diverse. So there's a really important thing here to think about the fact that not every single audience is the same, and organizations that try and impose too much on a global standard across a diverse population are going to get themselves into trouble.
Yeah. All right, then. So we got a lot of comments, a lot of praises and very good comments for you both. And I really want to thank you for this great panel, a invigorating panel. So I wanna have Matthias perhaps bringing a thought and closing this first day of the conference.